think once you hear from these folks, you'll understand the very power that we've amassed as a community to be able to affect change. We have corporations and NGOs represented here as well as others who are doing great work in the space. So I'm going to introduce first David Caprera. David is a friend and a colleague, and we've been doing some work over the last several years. I've enjoyed working with David in my time at the Peace Corps, and then subsequent on some great work that we've been doing around the globe with Global Peace Foundation. But David is chair of the Building Bridges Coalition, and we could not have a better servant leader helping to convene those of like minds and hearts on the issue of volunteerism with the Building Bridges Coalition. So David's great that you're here with us. He's also a non-resident fellow at Brookings Institute and again vice president at the Global Peace Foundation. We also have with us Kathy Dennis. This is not in order, by the way. I'm just going to read it off the sheet here. Kathy Dennis, who's executive director of VEGA. So here's the amazing thing about Kathy. Kathy says she's been working in this space for over 30 years, but clearly I think that's an error because she's been doing anything for 30 years.
I got him to prove it.
Oh, there you go. And then we have Amanda MacArthur. Amanda from Pixera. Amanda, and you'll hear a little bit in the dialogue that we'll have. Amanda was great and instrumental in helping the Peace Corps orchestrate a partnership with IBM. And I did some early work on that program before I left the Peace Corps. But like many things at the Peace Corps, once I left, things happened. So you can take that back. I don't know what that means for my career. But anyway, Amanda, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your contribution. And then Diane Melly, Vice President at Vice President at IBM for Global Citizenship Initiatives. Diane, what can we say? I mean, you really have demonstrated for the world what the role of the private sector can and should be on this issue and other citizenship issues. And I think that's very important. Having spent 15 years at Microsoft myself, I had the wonderful job of helping the company understand what its role and responsibility in development. And I will tell you that that was the absolute best time of my life. I got a chance to travel around the world and offer to nonprofit organizations, development organizations, all those laboring in the space that we all love here, to offer to them whatever Microsoft had to bring to the table. And I know that Diane Melly is absolutely doing the same thing at IBM. So we look forward to hearing from you. And then Yasmin Shaheen Makam. She's Director of Strategic Engagement Service at Service Year Alliance. And boy, what a great time to be at SYA. And I think if you've been watching the movie, if you've been following this through the Franklin Institute, at Franklin Project at the Aspen Institute, to see where we've arrived in a short amount of time, I think it's a testament to the people that they are working with, and of course General Stan McChrystal, who was just absolutely amazing. But I'll just take you and remind you that the work that they're doing is so incredibly transformative. One only needs to look at Malia Obama, who has decided to take a gap year and serve before she goes off to Harvard. So I think that is such an incredible story, and it really gets to the very heart of what SYA has been promoting over the last several years. So, all right, so without further ado, I will now take a seat and join these folks. So bear with me for a moment here because we're using the technology, and I got to dial up all of my questions. So before we do, while I do that, I'll just ask David to start with a few opening remarks, and then the panel can flow in order, and then we'll jump right into the panel. All right, great.
Thank you, Corey, and thanks everyone for joining us today and being leaders in this effort, this momentous effort at a crossroads. Thank you, Mike and VEGA and Angela, for your amazing work. To our founding chair, Senator Harris Wofford, our honorary chair, and Steve Rosenthal at CCS, our chair, Service Year Alliance partners, IBM, Pixera, Impact 2030, IAVE, Partners in the Americas, and each of you here are so important in this cause. BBC was pleased last June. I see Lex Rafo, my colleague from Brookings, who helped organize a major event last June, applauding this 2030 agenda and the role of international volunteers. We had the UN Youth Envoy, Carrie Hessler, with Peace Corps, the head of UN Volunteers, and our own General Stanley McChrystal with Service Year Alliance, kicking this off with Diane Melly and many of you here. That convening in today's event tees up a national policy discourse and bipartisan platform for the new administration in Congress. That platform includes things like the Service World Framework, Harris, that we built together with Diane and over 300 groups, from AARP to universities, corporations like IBM and others throughout the country, built a mandate for global service fellowships, the role of highly skilled volunteers like Farmer to Farmer, the role of partnerships and multi-stakeholders, and certainly an expansion of the Peace Corps to fulfill its purpose. Ted Abrams, by the way, is here, Glenn Blumhorst with the Peace Corps Association, among others, to further our nation's citizen diplomacy, alongside NGOs, faith-based groups, companies, and progressive universities like Tufts Tisch College, who's here with us today. So today, we ask the incoming Trump administration and Congress to please join us. While the new administration rightfully pays attention to stepping up national and homeland security, we extend in this season of 1,000 lights that to engender sparks of each act of love, each act of service, indeed, is one of those potent ways to truly secure our peace at home and with our neighbors abroad. So today, BBC, with our partners here, is pleased to announce a 3-year campaign to step up 10,000 Global Service Year volunteers that were commenced right away. Thank you, Steve, for the survey and foundational work that was done, also at the Brookings Conference. That will be through NGOs, through faith-based groups again, through companies like IBM, and many means to step up, along with Peace Corps, measurable outcomes that we'll talk more about in this panel, in fighting disease, fighting poverty, and indeed achieving 2030 goals. BBC will also be building a grassroots voice in the 1 million volunteers, according to BLS statistical standards. That's how many are out there in this universe. We're going to engage them in this consistency, not only on development outcomes, but to answer that famed last question of Sarge Shriver. Where the hell is the peace in Peace Corps, he said. And we have seen that. We've seen it in Northern Ireland with Catholics and Protestants working across boundaries. I saw it recently in India to see young Pakistani girls cross over the border in India to work together in schools on teaching, on English, on hygiene. We see it even in Northeast Asia, in places like Mongolia and North and South Korea. The power in Green Asia, the power of volunteers indeed to be our nation's best diplomats, we in service to village health workers and others throughout the world. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Okay.
In this order, by the way. We'll make this real simple. Just keep going this way.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you, VEGA, for convening this event today. I was around at the beginning of VEGA, so it's great to see the organization still continuing and continuing to do such great work. Just a little personal background for me. My first kind of experience in the volunteer space was when I was 16. I did a program called Amigos de las Americas. I spent a summer in Paraguay giving vaccines, which I don't know why they gave a 16-year-old that job, but I did it. And it opened my eyes, and it opened my life in a way that I couldn't have imagined before. I grew up in Kansas City. There's no borders, international borders around where I grew up, and this was really a welcome to the big world little girl moment for me at 16, and it has clearly continued into my adult life and my career as well. At Pixera Global, our mission as an organization is to reinvent how the public, private, and social sectors engage to solve complex global problems. And I can't think of a better way to do that than through volunteerism. It really is a way to encourage the best and the brightest from our leading companies to engage and to share and to transfer skills all around the world. At the same time, it's this amazing way, as David said, to build bridges and to create these connections that, I think in the current global environment, we hunger for and that we need more than ever. This person-to-person interaction is so critical in how we, as not just a country, America, but as a species, are able to move forward. So I'm so proud to be part of an organization that is really dedicated to creating those types of connections. At Pixera Global, we work with about 15, give or take, multinational corporations on programs of varying sizes. And we'll talk a little bit about the really exciting partnership between IBM and Peace Corps in a minute, but I can't tell you how many of these volunteers we probably send to about 500 volunteers a year overseas come back and say, this was a transformational experience. It transformed my view of the world. It transformed my view of my company. It transformed how I am going to do my job from now on. And I just can't imagine a better way to engage with people than to be able to provide them with a transformational experience. So I hope that we can continue to encourage this type of interaction and engagement all along the spectrum, from 16-year-olds going to Paraguay to IBM managers and executives going to work in Accra, Ghana with the Peace Corps, to retirees doing great work in other parts of the world. So I really, I hope that we can continue the dialogue around this and encourage the enthusiasm that we have in this room to really spread outside of this room and certainly kind of outside of Washington.
Well, great, Amanda. That'll be your job today, to spread the word and to get some enthusiasm so that we can grow that program. Thank you so much. Yes, Yasmin.
First of all, hello to all of you, and thanks so much to VEGA for having us here today. Thanks also to my colleagues on the panel. I know both Kathy and Corey have done service years before, as have I. I served in 2008 in Washington, D.C., and I know a number of other people in the room have as well. So thank you for your service and for laying pathways for those of us that want to do long-term service engagements. I really appreciate the path that you've laid for me to take advantage of. It's the largest privilege of my life to have been able to serve as an AmeriCorps member. A few reasons I'm particularly excited to be here today. One of them, David already mentioned and brought up a lot of the things that we're very excited to be partnering with BBC on. I'm also pretty excited to think about what the different policies are that we can talk about moving forward in the new administration and with the next Congress. I think that's going to be a critical component to how we reframe a lot of the work that we do, both at the Service Year Alliance and for all of our organizations in the room. So I'm excited to talk about that. I also want to think about the fact that we've done a lot of polling and focus groups with young people to figure out what it is that they want to do when they do their service years. And we found that young people have a particular interest in serving abroad. And so when we partner with the BBC and many of you hopefully in the future and thinking about how we grow those opportunities, we should keep in mind that this is something that young people are demanding of us, and that's what we're reacting to. So it's critical to think of our audience. I'm excited to think about the people that we're responding to during the pieces that we're going to put together when we create new policies, create new programs, and scale those programs that you guys have that already exist that are doing fantastic work moving forward. I think Corey mentioned this already, or maybe it was Michael before, but 1 in 6 people are accepted to the Peace Corps. And that's pretty ridiculous, that we turn 5 people who want to serve their country abroad away every year. And I think that's another thing that we want to keep in mind when we talk about growth up here on this panel, is making sure that we already have the demand that we know is available, and we have the young people, which is the supply, that want to do this. So how do we make sure we're matching that up pretty well? And then the last thing that I've really worked to keep in mind a lot since this past election and at Service Year Alliance as we do our jobs is, I believe it was President George W. Bush who said, we need citizens, not spectators. And I think that's pretty critical in the exact moment we're in as a country. And so that's the last thing that I'm really going to hold on to when we're thinking through solutions up here on the panel.
Great, Yasmin. I'm excited that you're willing to take on the new administration. I'll hold you to that, and you heard it here first. But I think it's so critically important that we keep the momentum. Peace Corps was able to secure its largest budget funding this year with President Obama, and we certainly do not want to go the other direction. I will tell you, having worked with the Peace Corps and saw that the agency under the leadership of Carrie Hessler-Radlett, she charged us all with making it easier for young Americans of all ages, quite frankly, to apply to the Peace Corps. And we were able to do that with some great passion. We removed many barriers so that we could see the applicant numbers go up. We were working against a narrative, quite frankly, that people weren't interested in the Peace Corps. We proved them wrong. What we needed to do is get out of our own way, make it easier for people who have interest to apply to the Peace Corps, and we saw our numbers grow exponentially. So the demand is absolutely there. And now that has to be matched with the funding that we need to make certain that Americans can serve and go do this great work called volunteering around the globe. So, Diane, please.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's wonderful to see so many people that are committed to service, as is IBM, and as is the corporate sector. So I'll just spend a few minutes sharing what the trends are that are happening in our corporations and how we are collaborating with the not-for-profit sector and the public sector to really make the corporate sector a partner and really a force for social good. I have, as Corey had shared, the pleasure of working at IBM, where at IBM as a company, our purpose is to really make a difference in the world, to really create solutions that make the world a better place. So our company is about that, as are many other companies. So when you think about the trends of how companies are supporting their employees, and it is really a competitive advantage for companies. Young people, as they're looking to engage and begin their careers, want to work for companies that are supporting their employees' service both internationally as well as in the U.S. So what you'll see companies doing, IBM amongst many, is really integrating their corporate volunteerism programs with the purpose of their company, as well as with their business strategy. So they're unleashing first of all, encouraging their employees to really align their skills and talents with social issues. That they really put the right supports in place in their company to really ignite the passion of their people to serve, and that the companies are supporting them. It's very important that companies realize that they're not doing this alone, that they're collaborating, as Amanda said, with many incredible NGOs, with the Peace Corps, with many, but again, really at scale. The interesting part about where companies are, and this is when Corey and I first met several years ago, if you look at one company, IBM as an example, I'll pick IBM as an example, we have 285,000 of our 425,000 employees who are actively engaged in volunteerism and service. And the impact that they can have, 20 million hours of service to date. We're sending, as Amanda said, 500 IBMers on corporate service corps assignments around the world. That's one company. So companies are realizing the importance of what this means to their individual company, but very importantly, as companies come together and work together. And that's where I wanted to share my remaining minute or two on Impact 2030. Companies are all about the bottom line. And how are we directing our greatest resource, our human capital, on social issues for real change in the world? And so companies are coming together on something called Impact 2030. That is a private sector-led initiative where companies are aligning their corporate volunteerism programs to the Sustainable Development Goals. So we have over 60 companies so far that are engaged. And again, think of the scale, think of the potential of all of these companies coming together. First of all, mapping all of their existing volunteerism programs to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and aligning their resources to the achievement. They're communicating out to their employees how important it is that they engage and that they can have both an impact as an individual, but then collectively with the entire corporate sector. And in closing, I think what the companies are really looking at is how do you measure this? So as the companies come together, the third component of Impact 2030 is looking at developing a strategy for how to actually measure. We all talk about hours, but we really need to get much deeper, and IBM has committed, as you would expect, 3 pro bono data scientists for social good who will actually use data science, looking at the World Wide Web and the data available from all of the companies and partners like IAVE, like United Way, like Points of Light, like Pixera, to understand the big picture data that's out there and create the new ways that we can, in 2030, share with the world how the needle has moved on so many issues and exactly how the corporate sector has contributed to that progress.
Great, Diane. Looking forward to hearing more about Impact 2030. But more importantly, also would like you to expound a little bit on the retention of employee strategy, that idea that employees are looking for corporations to work, for whom to work, where the value of service and volunteerism is not just something they talk about, but ingrained as a core value of the corporation. So looking forward to hearing more on that. My good friend, Kathy Dennis, former, or I should say, returned Peace Corps volunteer. She's labored for 30 years. I can't believe that, but please.
Well, since we're telling stories out of school, Amanda talked about 16. I was 5 years old when I helped Grandma with bingo. That was my first volunteer.
Was it at a church?
It was at a church.
Okay, well there you go. That's where service starts.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us here this afternoon. And congratulations. Congratulations to all the volunteers who are being recognized today and who are being recognized around the world. We've heard a lot about international service already and that cross-border work that many of the organizations represented here and the companies that are represented by Impact 2030 and Pixera and others are doing with their cross-border programs. But I want to also be the voice of local volunteering. So as much as we talk about the thousands of volunteers who are leaving their countries to volunteer, there are millions and millions of volunteers who are volunteering locally in their communities, in their regions, in their countries, or in their states. And that's where a lot of the impact is happening with the help of those other volunteers that are coming from abroad. I think that we were asked to talk a little bit about what our organization has been doing since June. Many of you know we just finished a World Conference and World Youth Volunteer Conference in Mexico, where we had over, between the Youth Conference and the World Volunteer Conference, we had over 1,500 people come together to talk about volunteering. And it was very, very exciting. We gave out awards. Lots of fun things happened. But again, one of the things that's really important to us is to make sure that we get organizations who use volunteers to talk about that. I think that that's a huge challenge. Here we are in the second year of the SDGs. We have more than 20 countries that reported this year on their SDG advancement, and not a single one of them used the word volunteer in their report. So we can sit back and be really complacent and say, hey, it's great, we're giving out all these awards, we're volunteering, we have millions of volunteers, but people still are not talking about it. People are not talking about what we need them to do. So one of the things that did happen at the World Conference that I'm really proud of is one of our speakers, Salil Shetty, from Amnesty International, the Secretary General, talked about his activists and that they are volunteers. And they have hundreds of thousands of volunteer activists who are helping to make community change. And that's what we need, all the organizations we work with. We need them to say that. They need to talk about their mission and the role volunteers are playing in the same breath. Or we are going to be here 15 years from now bitching and moaning that volunteering isn't recognized. So I think we need to really not forget that, and really that has to be part of our mantra every day, is how do we get these organizations we're working with to continue to promote the work that volunteers are doing. One of the ways that that IABE is doing that is a few days ago we launched a new website, Volunteer 2030. This is a way for us to recognize the roles volunteers are playing on a daily basis in response to the Sustainable Development Goals. So please look at that website, 2030, volunteer2030.org. This is a continuation of the website that ended last year, 500 Ways, where we recognize roles volunteers were playing in achieving the Millennial Development Goals. Now we're working on the SDGs, and we need to continue to do that promotion. One other area that we worked in with IABE that I think is really important and plays a role going forward is we just launched a handbook on youth volunteering and employment and how important it is to engage young people to help them understand that through volunteering, maybe all the jobs aren't there for them to gain their skills, but through volunteering they can gain those skills that are important for them in future employment. So that's available on our IABE website. Right now it's in 2 languages. It will be in others shortly. The other area of research that we worked around is researching the national volunteer structures for volunteering. We typically use the word National Volunteer Centers. That's not a common language around the world. So we really looked at and found in over 100 countries around the world that there is some kind of national structure that promotes volunteering. And so these are partner organizations that all of us can be working toward, and either locally and engaging more volunteers on a local level, or when we're looking at how do we partner with organizations and place volunteers through our cross-border programs in the future. How can we work with these national volunteer structures to really engage volunteers in a meaningful way and to help accomplish the things that we want to accomplish?
Well, thanks, Kathy. I look forward to hearing more about your passion on this issue. I know that so many of us, she's a little bit passionate, but so many of us worked really hard to make certain that the conversation around the SDGs included substantially in conversation, and not just conversation, but some real metrics around volunteerism and its impact. So we are here today gathered to talk about the partnering for greater impact around the SDGs through volunteerism. So we'll hear more about that, but I'm a little bit concerned that the reports are not reflecting the great work that many of us in this room and our colleagues around the world fought very hard for. To be a part of the conversation as the UN was framing up the SDGs, talk substantially about what it means for volunteerism and its impact. So we will stay on the fight with you, and we appreciate your great passion on it. Amanda, I'm going to turn to you and have you talk a little bit more about the Pixera partnership with the Peace Corps and IBM.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really IBM's partnership with Peace Corps, and we just are there as a facilitator on the ground. I think it's what makes it, just to step back a little bit, we actually, Pixera Global had a partnership with USAID a few years ago called the Center of Excellence for International Corporate Volunteerism. It was a last-minute name. It was horrible. I understand. But we really struggled. The goal of the partnership was to link corporate volunteers into USAID programming and beneficiaries, and we really struggled to find missions that were willing to work with the private sector. They were not used to that type of relationship, especially when we were talking about human capital as opposed to financial capital. And we really had a tough time finding missions that were willing to open their doors. Fast forward a few years, and now we have this great partnership that IBM and Peace Corps have been able to put together, different agency, but still a formal partnership to link the great expertise of the IBM Corporate Service Corps, which is on the ground for 4 weeks. And sorry, I don't want to take your thunder, but Corporate Service Corps is an average of 10 to 12 IBM employees. It's highly competitive. They are in market for 4 weeks. And during that time, they will work with 3 to 4 local NGOs or local government or different agencies on skills-based, deliverable-based projects. What's the beauty of this program is that it then links a Peace Corps response volunteer into the program. The Peace Corps response volunteer works very closely with the IBMers while they're on the ground, and then continues the work for several months afterwards. So kind of solving one of these challenges we frankly have with corporate volunteerism, which is that they're only available for a pretty short period of time. We can't be taking people out of their corporate jobs for 2 years like you do with the Peace Corps. They're there for several weeks, and they're able to do amazing work over the course of several weeks, but they can't be there for full implementation generally. By tying this into a Peace Corps response volunteer, we're then able to at least partially address that challenge. So last year the program piloted in 3 countries. It piloted in Ghana, appropriate, as the location of the first Peace Corps volunteers, and also one of the very first Corporate Service Corps teams. So a great place to start. We worked on projects associated with Let Girls Learn, which was really exciting. We then did the project in the Philippines, in Los Banos, and in Mexico City. So the program looked a little different in each location, but we were able to work out the model and hopefully move forward with this great opportunity to link kind of very high-level expertise with more general expertise so that the organizations are really able to benefit over the long term.
Great, thanks, Amanda. So what we're going to do here is I want you all to be thinking about questions, because what I have vowed to do is not wait until the very end of the discussion here. We're pretending that we're in a living room someplace, but we have you all here as well. So we want to make certain that you have an opportunity to ask questions. I'm going to go one more round, and I'm going to look to you all. If you have questions, I'd like for you to pose them to the panel, to the panelists, and then we'll try to keep this rich and dynamic as we approach the second half of the time allotted. So, Diane, I want you to talk a little bit more about Impact 2030. I'd love to hear what you think the organization will do over the course of the next 14 years that we have to work against the SDGs. You know, what's the big boulder, if you will, that the corporations would like to help address?
Well, it's interesting because as I was listening to Kathy's remarks, I think a lot of things that you hit on are things that Impact 2030 has as objectives. So, number one, I think that the corporate sector is pretty silent in terms of the number and the quality of volunteers in country, as well as those that are traveling internationally. So I think the first thing for Impact 2030, when you're engaging these corporations, you're engaging the full force of social media and the full force of the communication teams at these companies, along with Impact 2030 collectively telling that story of all of these corporations. And it's very important because the companies don't want to engage if they're not having an impact.
Right.
And so one is telling the story, but then on that second piece that I mentioned earlier, in terms of being able to measure it in ways that really relate to moving the needle on the social issues, that work has begun. So the companies are assessing and mapping which goals. So let's just take goal 4, education, and the companies that are doing mentoring programs. How are we really going to determine 14 years from now whether the needle moved on that issue?
Well, the question of effectiveness is really important, right? If we're not effective, if you can't measure the work with some targeted outcomes, then the companies are less likely to make those investments as you go forward.
That's correct, and that's why Impact 2030 is so important, because one area is activation, but then very importantly, and I think it was the selling point for IBM coming in as a founding partner, was let's not just track our hours and our numbers of employees. So we're very much embarking upon a mission together where the companies that are aligning and the stakeholder not-for-profits that are coming together in Impact 2030, we are going to try to measure truly what the corporate sector impact is. And it's not written yet, it's not defined. So we know hours, we know numbers, and just gathering that up is an impressive collection of impact. But what we really want to do, and as I referred to, IBM's contributing 3 full-time research scientists to this, to really look at how do you use cognitive technology, how do you use big data to really create the mathematical algorithms so that the modern technologies can arrive at how do we really determine our impact. Technologies like Watson, which many of you may or may not have heard of, is IBM's cognitive computing technology. It's
Has anybody beat Watson yet in chess?
Watson beat the players, the human beings, on Jeopardy. That's where Watson got introduced.
He's moved on to Jeopardy.
He's moved on to Jeopardy.
Family Feud is in his future as well?
It's too easy for him. Watson has the ability to ingest billions of bytes of data. And so we want to deploy, right now, Watson was introduced on Jeopardy and is now being trained at the Mayo Clinic and at Sloan Kettering to be an oncology assistant. So this technology that's coming into play right now to solve really important problems in the world, we're going to deploy that same technology to say, look, corporations are engaging, millions and millions of employees around the world on service. Watson, what do you see? How do we determine how to measure that and align it to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals? So it's work that's really exciting. It's work that's got all of the companies that are part of Impact 2030 excited about it, and people like Kathy and Ayave and our other partners saying, okay, yes, let's do it together. It's magnificent to see the collaboration that's happening, not just with the companies, but with the NGO partners who are all in their different focuses of their international volunteerism programs, but they're all coming together to share their data so we can really look at this, and we really can tell that story both, as Kathy said, at the global level, but it's so important for all of the companies. How do you tell that story at the local level, on the ground? That's where it's happening. That's where it matters to our employees and how they see it playing out in the local geographies.
Yeah, great. We'll never have enough time for these types of discussions, so I'm going to take a pause here and ask if there's anybody in the audience that has a question you'd like to pose to the panel. Now's your chance. Anybody? Okay, question in the back. Microphone going around? Okay. Don't fight over the mic. Minutes are ticking away.
Am I passing it, or is it me?
No, it's me.
Oh, great. You have the mic, sir.
Hi. I am Alex Moseson with Purdue University, and I represent global engineering programs and a consortia across campus, including agriculture, Discovery Park, and more. As those partnerships imply, partnership is at the core of what we do and how we engage in volunteering and beyond. So my question to the panel is, how do you engage partnerships? How do you build them and sustain them for the greatest effectiveness? Understanding that you may find some frenemies in this field, or in the case of Impact 2030, folks that you normally wouldn't collaborate with. So curious to hear you expand on the role of partnership.
Great. Well, I'd love to take on that question, but I'm not a panelist today. But having run the Peace Corps' Office of Strategic Partnerships, I will tell you that it's tough work. Particularly when you are looking in corporations like IBM and Cisco and others who are looking to engage the government, who quite frankly has a certain level of risk aversion that doesn't always support the engagement at the level that corporations expect partners to bring to the table around these things. And so it's really difficult work, and I think my experience is that you have to work at it for a long time. I exhausted myself working with the legal counsel, the general counsel's offices, and I imagine that institutions can likewise be risk averse. Perhaps that's the case at Purdue, but you've got to have some commitment, and the commitment literally has to come from the very top of the organization. You have to have the leader of the organization, the leader of the government agency, the leader of the corporation to say, this is a core value, we will absolutely do it. But it has to be translated to a bottom line conversation. What is the value that we extract by having our employees, 200,000 employees engaged, spending hours doing work? And so I think in all of our institutions, whether in government, nonprofit organization, or in a corporation, you have to respond to that question. And how does the work that we do in this space ultimately affect and impact the bottom line? Are we getting, and we're mission driven, we all are. How does it support the mission? Anybody else want to tackle that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, I think partnership is kind of one of those words that almost is used too much. I think it kind of almost doesn't mean anything anymore. We use it so much. But at Pixar Global, partnership is at the very core of what we do, so much that we actually have created a training that we provide, a simulation, so that everyone can kind of play everyone else's role. But I think there's a few things you have to do. One is you have to recognize the expertise that everyone brings to the table, and that if there's no reason to partner, don't partner. Right, partnering for the sake of partnering is ridiculous, frankly. They're hard. It's an art. It is not a science. I think you have to know what your walk-away point is also. And having that laid out early is really important so that there are no surprises. And then communication. I mean, it is a marriage, right? And if you aren't talking about who you are, what you're doing, what your goals are, and I think that's another point of it, is your goals don't have to be the same. Okay. They just can't be mutually exclusive. Exactly. And so, sometimes I think we get caught up in the idea that, we all have to be going to the same final destination. We don't. We have to be going the same general direction. Yeah. We just can't be going kind of like this.
And having self-interest is okay.
I think it's required, actually.
If you're not clear about it on the front end, it doesn't work. Right. It's like a marriage. Although I'm not married, I don't really know what I'm talking about here, but I think I'm married. You got to kind of come together and say, well, these are the things we agree about, and this is what I'm looking to get out of this relationship.
And Corey, I would just add to complement everything that's been said already. A number of years ago, I was in the UK at one of the IAVE gatherings, and it was a number of very significant NGOs and myself and Ed Martinez from UPS, and we're meeting. And it was so refreshing. The NGOs actually said what was on their mind. They said, we don't trust the corporations. We don't think you're in it for the right reasons. And fine, put it out there, because I know that the companies are in there for the right reasons. But if you don't build that trust, the reason we have a great relationship with Pixera is that's over 10 years that we've been working day to day, sending those corporate service corps members together. So that relationship is very mature. So then you can take it to another level with the Peace Corps coming in partnership. So really 2 T's to go with your feet for a minute.
Okay.
That it really is trust. All of these are relationships of people working together. And in the cases of corporations, depending on which country we're in, which corporation it is, you've got to get that trust on the table and build that trust and continue to build it over time.
And it has to be localized. I think you really have to. We talked about sort of locations and that kind of thing. You can't have a one-size-fit-all model for partnership, and that's oftentimes where the fail points are. You can talk at a very high level. The leaders are talking to leaders, but at the mission level, it may fail because it may not be the right program. So we've struggled with that as well. David, I don't want to leave you over there. I want you to talk a little bit about the work at GPF you're doing. You spend your time developing strategic partnerships. What are some of the dynamics that you've encountered, and the challenges, and some of the wins that can you share some of that?
Well, 24 hours after the Nepal earthquake that took about 10,000 lives last year, the Minister of Youth emailed me, "Come now." Called Diane Melly, and within 72 hours, IBM flew over from Delhi and helped equip 2,000 young volunteers who became Rise Nepal to work with 3,000 families. And Diane, I think the amazing thing there was the young people themselves learning what Sahana is, learning about your technology, and building, even in the midst of a new constitution crisis, their role in paving a future for Nepal. So I think this area of partnerships is one that BBC as well, since our kickoff at Brookings, is working hard on. We had with IVPA, a consultant, Linda Stewart, do a study for us for Service Year to look at our partnership along the 2030 goals. I mean, nothing beats having clear, focused objectives and outcomes to work towards. So areas like English teaching is a huge market for global education service. Well, Tisch College, I think Mindy's here, Tufts University, our friend Dean Alan Solomon, teaming up with Teach for All in India, Global Citizen Year, formed a partnership, NGO, campus, working together to tackle that goal in a massive way in India. Health Service Corps, things like in OmniMed. I totally subscribe to what Kathy Dennis had to say. It isn't about, at the end of the day, just the volunteer sending. It's what's going on in those villages. For example, 80 volunteers, about 3 Peace Corps volunteers of Ed O'Neill's OmniMed, generates 1,300 village health workers on the ground in Uganda dealing with diarrheal disease, it's life-killing, and malaria, and evidence based on clinical, randomized trial evaluation. We're going to apply that across these 20-30 years. So I think that's part of the excitement of Impact 2030, coming together, corporate, NGO, university, around goals in the next 14 years to bring real outcomes and, as you said, Kathy, leveraging that real volunteer grassroots base on the ground.
Great. So I will go to the audience for a question. My former colleague at Peace Corps there.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is BJ Webstein, and I am with the Peace Corps. Thank you all for all this wonderful discussion around partnerships. And specifically, we've talked about partnership to create more volunteer opportunities, especially with the IBM Peace Corps partnership, which we greatly appreciate. We've also talked about partnership for improved outcomes in the field. But one challenge we see at the Peace Corps, and I'm sure talking to my other colleagues in the service world, not everybody feels like they can take a gap year. Not everybody feels like they can afford to volunteer. So my question is, how can we leverage partnerships to demonstrate to young people and old people and people of all walks of life that service is a pathway to success? And how can we help use partnerships to create pathways for people who have done those volunteer opportunities to go then and work in those partner organizations or find other ways to contribute. Thank you.
Great, thanks, BJ. Well, one only needs to look at you. You served. Where did you serve?
I was a Peace Corps volunteer in China.
Okay, so you're a great example of what happens when you serve and volunteer, and I think that's quite frankly the case to be made. Yasmin, you want to take that?
Sure. One of the things that we're working on specifically is increasing the value proposition for service, and if I understand BJ's question correctly, we often hear that people don't feel like they can take that year when they're young Americans, but it's because we haven't made a good enough argument sometimes that resonates with all different types of young Americans. We probably all in this field know that when service is just available to the upper classes in our country, it's not inclusive in a way that builds pathways to employment and further education, and it doesn't reflect the best that we have to offer either, because we're not growing from the diversity that we have in this country, either if people are serving at home or abroad, for that matter. So in terms of increasing the value proposition for service, the first one is something we work with the Peace Corps on, which is the Employers of National Service program, which is employers, more than almost 400 of them now, standing up to say, we want to employ you. We value the skills that you've built during your service here. We know what that means to our organization. We know what it means to our industry. And that's why we want to get to you first. So that's one critical way we do that. Another way is talking to higher ed institutions and saying, we have a toolkit, the higher education toolkit. You can find it on our website, servicehere.org. But a few things in that are very easy for higher ed institutions to do. If you served in a service year program, will you waive the application fee to apply to a graduate institution, right? Easy peasy. But some of them, like Tufts, as David mentioned, Tulane, other schools like that, have gone so far in the other direction as actually creating a service year program for their students, right? So that's another way that higher ed institutions can increase that value proposition. And although that might not be someone serving abroad or through the Peace Corps, that helps our entire industry elevate what it means to do service so that we start valuing it higher in our society. And so young people look at that as an opportunity to get ahead rather than just a break out of the pattern of their life that they foresee.
I think that's great. And I think that I will speak on behalf of the Peace Corps. I would say we would also consider that to be a great opportunity to be a feeder experience to join the Peace Corps post-graduation from their undergraduate studies. And so I think you're right, making the case. I think you have to make the case for any decision that one makes, whether it's to which school you decide to go to or what career you decide to pursue. So I'm going to take, we've got only a few minutes left. I think I saw Steve Rosenthal's hand at some point. Steve, are you there's Matt and Stay. You guys are co-laborers, so we'll take friends and partners in the fight.
Sure. Matt Clausen, Partners of the Americas, BBC and America Solidaria, US. I think it's safe to say that the people in this room didn't come here to see if they think volunteering is a good idea, but we're all advocates and going out to convert others that it's a higher priority than they're currently taking it. Maybe that it's not even just a good idea, they probably think it's a good idea. I'm wondering what examples you have in your different areas where you could say, for example, a compelling argument, perhaps, what happens if we don't engage or recognize volunteers in the SDGs? What happens if we don't engage corporations with their employees as volunteering? Or what happens if thousands or hundreds of thousands of U.S. citizens don't take a service year? Is there a here's the other alternative argument that would be powerful? And I know it's not as simplistic as saying what happens in a town with a volunteer fire department if you don't have volunteers. But what can we do to make that case to people who aren't in this room?
Great. Kathy, can you take that question?
Sure. I can take a piece of it.
You can take a piece of it.
Yeah.
I want to we're down to our final minute here, so I want to make sure you have an opportunity to give some thoughts.
I think that, God, I can think of a lot of arguments that we should be giving. But I think that in relation to the comment I made earlier about what happens when countries don't report on the SDGs and the role volunteers are playing, I think that it's about resources. And if that recognition isn't there, then those resources aren't put to bear against helping to promote volunteering and to promote getting those goals done. I think that that was what we know happened with the MDGs, is that the resources weren't set aside to help those national volunteer leadership structures to really engage more volunteers on the ground to help to implement the programs to support the MDGs. So because we have that experience, we know that if we don't promote volunteering now, those resources aren't going to be there to help to engage more people at a local and national level. So that's one quick answer.
Diane?
And I would add really quickly, and I referred to it earlier, for many companies right now, it's a talent war. The top young people and the skills that we need for our businesses to be successful, those young people have a choice to pick where they want to work. And we're hearing loud and clear from them, and fortunately our culture fully supports that we want to encourage you to volunteer, to share your talent. It's not just beneficial to the community, it's beneficial to the individual employee who can grow their skills, who can really demonstrate their talents and really make a difference. So it's not off to the side over here for corporations, it's dead center, a strategy that's really critical to us keeping and attracting the right talent in order for our businesses to be successful.
Great, Diane. You are a true pro because I asked you to speak to the retention issue and you've just done so. That wraps up our panel. Please give my panelists a round of applause.